I'm going to give you a number.
Okay, give me a
100.
Oh, that's right. That's right. This is our 100th show, isn't it?
100th podcast. Yeah.
I wrote that down this week. But I forgot, man, we have been here for a while. It's almost 2 years of putting weekly shows together.
Yeah. I was thinking that who was it that said you needed to put in, was it 10,000 hours to become an expert? So we've only got 9,900 more hours to go.
Mercy. I tell you, the time does fly. When I was putting together this script and looking at what we wanted to talk about, there was one topic that we hadn't touched. We'd gone through, what had we gone through? We'd gone through talking about the exam content outline, and we were talking about projects and project management in general, but we never touched on value. And it's funny, it's always mentioned, but it's never actually described as a highlight until the advent of value or agile as part of the discussion in project management training. This is a funny concept. What is your experience with value? I have a little story to go on with mine, but before we get into my story, what's your experience with value?
I would say, let's see, we've talked about this several times, but if I were to go back to my early years as a project manager, we never considered value. We always considered on time, within budget, and to the client satisfaction. We never really thought about value. But late as I developed my project management career and got into understanding what it was that we were delivering for our client, then it became much more obvious to me that value was paramount. And here's what's interesting to me is I'm working on a project currently with a state organization, and it happens to be Agile. You just mentioned Agile. Happens to be an Agile project, and the project director from the state asked, after one of the program increments was completed, asked the system integrator, what value am I getting? And I thought that was interesting. So I'll leave it there, and I want to hear your little vignette.
So we're good at functionality and measuring functionality on a project. One of the things that we're not good at is measuring value. It's a little frustrating too. Actually, I was exposed to this dilemma about back in 2004, 2005, I forget when, but I had a Fortune 50 client who had brought me in not just as a project manager, but as a business analyst, and I was helping him put together a proposal. And he was in the job of consolidating about 380 data centers into 175. And he needed me to run the numbers on that, basically create both a net present value and a return on investment on that. And he really liked what I did. It took about 4 or 5 weeks to put it together, but I was pretty proud of it. And then he said, boy, this is nice, Tim, better than I expected. Now, we're going to turn this into a project. Show me where you're going to test for that return on investment. Show me the pilots that you're going to put together to demonstrate that value really, truly exists. I don't want paper. I want something that's real. I want you to hand over that value to me when you hand over the deliverable. And that's when I started getting it. This was real. This wasn't just a math exercise. This is something that measured a problem that they had, and they couldn't really have a successful project until that problem is solved.
So your client was asking you to prove value, not just put it on paper.
Yeah, not just demonstrate it, but hand it over. Here is your value. And that's what actually stuck in my mind. He was saying, yeah, let's do the user acceptance testing, but let's move it into operations so we can actually realize, because he was, in his mind, he wasn't paying for the functionality, he was paying for the value.
And that's where we as project managers need to understand what it is that we're doing in delivering projects. It's not just the schedule that we meet and the budget that we meet, but it's actually, do I have a, and I'm not going to say satisfied client, I'm going to say, do I have a delighted client?
Yeah, that's the term that stuck in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. Satisfaction met functionality.
Yeah.
We're not using that term. We haven't found a replacement term, but the attitude is the same. What is value in context of what we're talking about here inside of projects? What do we talk about when we talk about value?
I'm smiling because while you were giving us your little vignette, your little story, I happened to look up that I Googled that question. Talk about mind reading, Tim. Anyway, I don't know that I like this particular one. A project's value is defined by the value of a project. Let me start again. A project's value is defined by the value a project creates for its stakeholders.
That's a circular definition.
Exactly, yeah. But in some ways, though, there's a lot of truth in that. It is for your stakeholders. Yes, yeah. There's a value for me in my career. There's value for my team in their careers. But what value, what benefit, what long-term gain is my stakeholder family getting from what it is that I'm delivering?
Yeah. So if you go down to the roots of the word, and I remember years ago doing this and trying to get to the bottom of this value statement, something worthy of regard. Yeah. Like, I like this. This is the perfect cup. Okay. I regard this cup as being something better than other cups. That's value. It's a measure of usefulness, not just in and of itself, but in reference to other items. And there's another definition of value: something something that's worth sacrificing for. You're willing to give up something in order to get something else. There's that referential component of value, saying, this, of all these items, I hold this one higher than the others. So that's what we mean pretty much when we talk about value. And that's what we do when we select projects or make business decisions.
Well, and I think also, I'd mentioned that we're doing this with emphasis on our clients or our stakeholders. And by the way, for those or for those project managers who are listening to us, who are not external, but who are internal project managers to their organization, you also have clients. They're your business partners within the organization. But I mentioned that the emphasis is on their satisfaction or perhaps their delight. But I think because we're dealing in the world of IT, I think we also have to look at the fact that there's a technical effectiveness to what it is that we're delivering. And there's also a sense of efficiency. So if I'm not delivering an efficient program, an efficient benefit to my end user, then I haven't succeeded. I need to make them more efficient in what it is they do on a daily basis.
Good. I like the emphasis on, it's not my value. It's not the team's value. It's whoever approved, set aside the money, and is going to validate and in the end use that value. Those are the people who actually define the value. We're just stewards. we're just curators in a museum. We're protecting the value and making sure it exists.
Well, it's interesting, and we'll go on to another topic, but I just want to leave you with this little example. I was talking, well, this is a couple years ago now, but I was talking to a former client of mine. My team and I had completed a project for them back in the, get this, 1980s. Now, what 1980s, that was big iron. That was before internet, before, all of these kinds of new technologies. But in delivering that, I asked, well, when are you going to replace, or when did you replace that system? And this was 30 years later, they had not yet replaced it. So the fact is, I can conclude from that it was running an entire organization for all those years. Yes, they'd had it enhanced, but it was still on the old mainframe and it was still working for them 30 years later. So there must have been some technical efficiency that we had left them with.
And they were protecting it. They
Yeah.
were protecting it. That's interesting. Value is not a common discussion we have unless we have a certain type of leader who's either part of the project or is impacted by the business. Why do we miss talking about value even now?
Oh, that's pretty easy. I mean, you and I have been involved in projects. We get all excited about, the value up front, the return on investment, all of the feasibility issues that go along with the excitement of a new project. But when we get into that project and find out typically that we've underestimated it, or typically we don't have the skill set that we need to fully complete the project, we get so immersed in solving the day-to-day issues that somehow the value gets pushed to the background as we again go back to meeting timelines, meeting budgets, meeting those sorts of things. So that's my explanation.
Yeah, it's funny that schedule and budget and risk and quality often actually eclipse what we consider as the value of the project at the very beginning. Yeah. And that's what you're saying. By allowing value to not be a common conversation topic, what do we miss out on?
That's a good question. I think largely we miss out on seeing the progressive delight, I'm going to use that word again, on our clients' expressions as they see what's being delivered to them, especially if we're delivering incrementally. But I don't know. I'd like to hear your opinion as I think about this a little more.
There's two pieces that I've discovered, and this I earned. I didn't read this in a book. I had to put this together piecemeal. The first is you can actually demonstrate functionality. It's part of scope, right? You can say, here's the requirement. It does what it's supposed to do, the end. But you can't do that with value. The trick with value is it's not an end result. Think about a North Star, okay? A lot of projects are considered North Stars. A lot of projects have a North Star. It's not our destination, though. A North Star tells us we're on the right track. It actually helps us continue to refine our direction as we go through. So even though it's not the result, you can't really make people delighted. You can actually get the right work and get the right environment set up so people are happy and fulfilled, but you can't aim for delight. This is what I struggled with because there's some emotional content.
There is, but there's a couple of things. You used a couple of terms, refinement, and it made me immediately leap back to what we do in Agile. And if we're doing Agile in a solid professional manner where we have proper ceremonies, and at the end of every sprint, we actually deliver a demonstration of what we've delivered so far, I have seen those demonstrations become aha moments for the clients.
See, go ahead.
What they do is they compare how they did things the old way or how they are doing things the old way, and they're seeing what's being demonstrated, and immediately their mind is leaping towards, wow, this is going to make my job so much easier. And I do start to see incrementally that delight show up on their faces.
And it's funny because you talk about that incremental. It's almost like a continuous course correction.
Yes.
Like we do with ships out on the ocean. We're not heading to a destination per se, but we're using our understanding of where we are versus the general direction we want to do. And that, like you said, the ceremonies and that constant feedback and that constant refinement that actually tell us we're closer and closer. This is something very magical that once people understand, they can't keep their minds off of it.
Well, and this is exactly where we're going with this whole discussion, because I'm going to go harken back to my old waterfall days, and some of the projects I worked on, we could be in requirements definition for a year. Now, you don't see benefit in a requirements document that's just words on paper. I mean, you can start to imagine, right? And what ended up happening often is we would develop a feasibility study. We would show the return on investment if we did things based on certain alternatives analyses. We would end up doing all the right things. And then once we got immersed in the project, that feasibility study, that return on investment document was put on a shelf. And it became what we call shelf help. And so we would lose that thought process as to what the intended value of the project is. But with this incremental approach, especially as Agile pushes us towards incremental benefits, we can begin to see benefits earlier and earlier in the project. And actually, as we implement, we can also take part in the benefits that they're delivering for us. So from that perspective, I think that's how we keep value forefront to our teams and to our clients.
Yes. And again, people are more willing to sacrifice if there's something of value that they see. They're willing to let go of previous ideas. They're willing to let go of extra functionality if we can actually talk about the value. Now, there's another thing that value helps us with. Value is something we can use to influence.
And motivate.
Again, and motivate. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're able to actually use value to get people to do work better, because if they actually agree to the value, it's something meaningful to them, not just in an analytical manner, but in an emotional manner. And they're connected to it directly, which is incredibly powerful. This ability to connect to the emotions and get not just the logic, but the emotions behind a decision actually gets people to do more work and better work than we could ask them to do.
Oh my goodness. And again, I'm going to harken back to some of those projects where we would bring in specialists to do certain items. They would do their job perfunctorily. They would do their job in a way that was good. It was solid. But then they would leave the project before they saw the end result. And it was those of us who watched the implementation, who watched the rollout, and who stuck around for some hypercare and some maintenance and operations, that we could go into the field offices and watch the end users use their new product. Suddenly we became emotionally attached at that point because we saw the benefit to those folks. And I always felt sorry for the people on our projects who had to leave early because they specialized in certain items, but never got to stay to implementation. And so there is that emotional attachment when you see the benefit to your client.
Yeah, and we use the words benefit and purpose, and we sometimes actually get it. When we start articulating these things and we're able to actually demonstrate these things, turn them from tacit to explicit, we can actually use these to great advantage of the project.
So how do you think we, from a project management perspective, how do you think we can retain the discussion of value throughout the project? How do we keep it warm? I mean, we've talked about kind of the incremental benefits from Agile, but how do we keep that forefront, top of mind? Let me use that.
There are business mechanisms that actually help us. Let's talk about the project life cycle, okay? You have the purpose of the project. This is why the sponsors are willing to support it. and not only just support it, but get behind it and protect it. And once you have that, it's easier to go to the next step, which means that they're willing to actually agree and to influence with their assistants those who need to actually set aside the money. And once that's in place, there has to be a way that value statement in the project charter actually can be implemented in the plan. There has to be, just like quality activities, there have to be value activities, whether it's a small pilot to demonstrate return on investment, or whether it's a cost assessment while we're actually doing the work that's separate from what we're looking at in the business case. There has to be some demonstration of that value as we're going through.
One of our focuses for this year, we talked about, is kind of on the human aspects or the people aspects of what we do as project managers. And one of the things that I found that works well for me is, even as we focused on tasks and activities and schedules and all of that good project management fundamental, the aspects of what it is we do, every single team meeting, I would also focus with my team on what the customer needs and how the customer will benefit. And it's interesting, whenever we juxtapose those thoughts of the process and the client benefit, that always stayed in the forefront of their minds, so that they could, I'm doing this, but I want to do a really good job of this functionality because it's going to mean this to my end client. So
go ahead.
No, so that was one, but I've got several, but think you were going to add something at that point.
Yeah, there are other ways to influence. One of my project manager friends chose a mountain in the Pacific Northwest as a symbol of progression through the project. And it was really interesting to see how they mapped various paths on the mountain where people were going. And when they planted the flag at the top, the project was successful. But the thing is, that value statement is actually more meaningful. It's stating this has purpose, not just, to get to the top of the project. It's not just a destination. It's actually providing either, like you said, a benefit, a new opportunity, or it's solving a problem that nobody else has solved. And we can actually use that as, a unique reminder of, this project is solely responsible for not just solving a business problem, but making people's jobs easier.
Exactly. Another way that I found that worked well for my teams in terms of retaining the whole thought process of value throughout the project was that I would encourage them and challenge them to challenge the status quo. And if they could come up with a solution of a particular functional challenge that delighted the client, there's that word again, that presented a way that even the client never thought of, that was kind of like bonus points, and that was worthy of a bonus in their paycheck, perhaps. So there's many, many ways that we can continue just to keep that more than just process, but to keep that idea of providing value to our end users. And we always delivered on our promises. That was, if you deliver on your promise, that the value will come through.
Yeah, and you talked about something that we're going to have to talk about this year: status quo. There's a problem with status quo. This is how businesses stay in business. And a lot of our project work is right in the lines of what you said, challenging status quo. It's how do you actually do that without interrupting or disrupting or even disaffecting business?
Well, actually, in thinking through functional challenges, we would brainstorm. We would actually set aside meetings, perhaps over pizza at night in the evening, and we would brainstorm over a particularly challenging idea. Because had we followed the way that the client wanted to do it, it would not necessarily have improved the way they were doing their, it would take manual work and make it faster. That was about it. So we would brainstorm, we would test each other's ideas, but we would continue always to challenge those status quo. I mean, if you look at Agile came about because someone decided that waterfall took too long. And so they challenged the status quo of predictive projects.
Yeah, and again, status quo is not bad. Status quo says we know how to do it. We've done it before this way.
Yeah.
But the problem is when the environment or the context changes, sometimes there has to be a way to actually say, do we need to change our approach?
Well,
Yeah, this is one of those difficult areas of project management. How do we actually influence the change without isolating some of our critical stakeholders?
This is totally off topic of project management, but a few years ago, my wife and I had the privilege of traveling through Eastern Europe, and my heritage is Czech.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went into the Czech Republic. And one of the things I always wanted to look at was how the Czechs made their beer, because Czechs are famous for beer. And it's interesting, but we went to some breweries that were hundreds of years old. Now, someone along the way had challenged the status quo in terms of how to produce and how to deliver the beer to their clients. But the initial taste from hundreds of years ago never changed because that part of the status quo was untouched. So that's the balance, right? What's the benefit that the client's looking for? Don't touch my beer taste. But what's the other benefit they're looking for? Deliver it to me faster.
You don't do this using traditional approaches to project management.
Right.
It's a gentle approach to, how do I make those small incremental changes to evaluate whether we're closer or further away.
The other thing we did exactly in this was I was always challenging myself to build a great team. And the better team I had, the more I could challenge those, some of those weary status quo items. And I don't mean just my project team. I mean the combined team of those of us who are delivering the product, plus the brightest and best from my client organization, coming together in synergy to the point where we could challenge the status quo just because we had such excellence in our team.
Yeah, that's the hallmark of a good project. They're saying we don't know what we're going to have at the end, but we trust the process of getting there and we trust working together. That's, again, that's when you have a good team who's able to articulate those both. So let's go into that behavioral component. So value can actually get us to motivate. Have you ever thought about why value motivates so well?
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, I think I've shared the story with you before. I'm not sure we've done it on the podcast, but again, back to my early days, when we concentrated on schedule and not so much on value. I think I had my particular aha moment when I was working for a large city on their emergency services project. We were literally taking them from shoeboxes to an IT solution where they had computer terminals on their desk. Mm-hmm. And we'd laid out the project, we put it in a proposal, it all made sense. But it didn't really make sense to me until I decided to go in one evening to a field office where they were treating, on an emergency services basis, they were treating homeless people to perhaps nights in a hotel, meal vouchers, place to get cleaned up. So it was that sort of emergency services ideal. And that was the first time I realized this project I was delivering with my team was to benefit these homeless people that were truly down and out and needed help, needed assistance. And until I saw that, I did not recognize the true value or the true vision of what the city had envisioned for this project. I think that's the first time I came up with really understanding that what I was about to deliver would have incredible benefit beyond just delivering a paycheck to my company.
That I had a similar experience with an earlier data center project. So I was working in the Pacific Northwest, and the problem was everybody had their corporate files on these network attached storage devices, these NAS, right? And they would last for 3 years and they'd fail. And oftentimes critical data was lost. And so the company was willing to set to $10 to $40 million aside to provide a corporate solution so it would be protected. But there was this emotional attachment to having the files right down here by my feet. And it was really hard to break them from that mindset until one of the executives said, you know what, we're going to have to give them something that actually satisfies them more than having their files right physically there. They have to be willing to sacrifice that. And that's where I got the connection of value and sacrifice. This is where I started understanding that if you have true value, people will give up their previous or preconceived notions.
No, that's exactly right. And I'll tell you what else I learned from that particular experience with that emergency services department was from then on, whenever I managed a team, no matter what the project was, we would always do field visits. And it's amazing what happened when people would actually go out and see people doing their jobs day to day, interacting with perhaps their public, their clients, and then taking that observation back to the requirements definition, the design, and the development and delivery of the product that was going to solve the issue that they saw in those particular field office visits. And I remember particularly one time we'd been working on a project and we went out to a field office and we were dealing with notifications to our clients. And so we brought some example or some sample notifications and sat down with our clients and had them read those notifications and recite back to them how they understood them. It's amazing how we completely changed the wording on those notifications after we realized that people were not understanding the English that we had presented or the Spanish that we had presented. We needed to simplify the language in many ways. So it's interesting how a field office allows our team to stay motivated in different ways in order to accommodate the end user, the end functionality.
You know, it surprises me how many projects I actually managed in the early 2000s in total isolation of the client because they demanded it, not just requested it, not just it's a nice to have, say, don't bother me until you have what I want. And it has been a real learning experience for me, saying one of my jobs as a project manager is to get the buy-in for those regular interactions so we can tell whether we're getting closer or further away to what they want.
Well, I think without that, we end up delivering efficient but sterile systems.
Yeah, they're functional. They're
Yeah,
functional but meaningless.
right.
And the the project was a success, but the implementation failed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I have 5 or 6 projects that meet that, and it wasn't until I really understood the role of, identifying, using, and highlighting value throughout the discussion.
Well, just a really simple example. I signed on to look at my credit card bill online. And someone back in, and I'm not going to say which credit card company, but it starts with a V. And somewhere back in headquarters, someone decided they were going to change the entire format. Now I'm having to do extra clicks, extra work, and nothing is familiar. And I really have to sit there and concentrate on what it is that they're trying to tell me when the previous format worked. Why didn't they talk to their customers?
Yes, 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 1,000 times yes. If it isn't easier, if it isn't adding value, see, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Let's actually have a small discussion here because this is important. We've talked about minimum viable product, right? We've talked about MVP as being the least amount of functionality, and we can say it works, right? Now, here's the problem. Functionality has a tendency to disrupt. Like that added functionality, whatever that company built in to your experience is disrupting the process. Okay. Now, here's the thing. How are they actually giving you something worthy of that sacrifice? That's the key. And that's what we have to think of. If we're going to be upgrading software or changing a business process, yes, it may be a fact that it disrupts. And talk about a data center, that could be up to a year of disruption. The thing is, you have to have an ongoing discussion with your stakeholders, with your decision makers, and with your team that we have to give them something that's valuable enough to overcome that disruption. That's what's needed.
Well, and you've heard we've used the age-old adage of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, in this case, the example I just used with the credit card company, it wasn't broken. Now, if you want to add something else that helps me, that's great. But why change something that was working perfectly? So again, there's that trade-off between what is it that you're trying to do of value to your client versus somebody's better idea internally. And here's the other thing that I found working with project teams with programmers. Programmers don't think like their end users, and left to their own devices. And I'm not talking just programmers, I'm talking designers as well, and people who design systems. They would design you the most efficient product available that is completely unusable for the end user, because they think differently than how the end user has to work. So we always have to have that combination of what is valuable to my end user.
This is a struggle. This is one of the major education topics that I have when I'm working with a new team. Number one, we're going to use the terminology used by the users, not by the engineers. We're going to call these functions whatever the stakeholders call them. And if it's in code, it's in code. If it's in documentation, it's in documentation. So when we can hand them a document, they can read it and they can understand it.
Yep.
That has to be in place. Second of all, we have to validate and validate and validate. We can't just assume that everybody is an expert like us. And the problem is, whatever we're expert in is a habit. And we've forgotten what it took to actually learn what we take for granted now.
Yeah, and on that note, a lot of times when we do our deliverables, because we have to have interim deliverables so that people really understand kind of how we're getting to the end product. But we would always begin, as you were just saying, with something called a deliverables expectations document, meaning we would either summarize using an annotated table of contents as to what the deliverable will contain, or we somehow present all of the different areas that the deliverable will cover. So that first of all, before we even write the first word, our end user, our client, is able to look at that product as it's envisioned and make comments on it. Then when we write the deliverable, we may bring them in for some incremental reviews of what it is that we're doing. And again, read parts of it to them so that they understand what's going on. And then when we finally deliver for approval, they know exactly, our end users know exactly what it is that they're expecting. But there's that hand holding and there's that value stream that we're giving to them. But more importantly, we're also taking input from them and improving the product along the way. We always expect that improvement from them.
And that's a real struggle. I found this to be a real struggle because it's so slow.
It is slow.
But you know, it has to be that way. It has to be that way. You know, again, slow gets the aim correct. And then you can actually add the efficiency.
Yeah.
Once you experience this correctly the first time, then it starts making sense.
You know, but it may be slow, but I'm thinking back to the good old days of writing 3,000-page technical specs, handing it to our client, throwing it over the transom and saying, you've got 20 days to review this, approve it. Well, how do you go through 3,000 pages in 20 days and make sense of it? Unless you do this sort of incremental approach that we've learned to do. And it's, you know, the whole, again, if you're thinking value, you want to make sure that you're completely transparent at all times, in all phases, in all activities with your client.
And the thing is, there's something in the back of our head here that actually captures when we have something of value. Like you said, that aha moment. This is what's so valuable about using value, because it resonates back here. It goes aha back here, yeah, which is milliseconds compared to seconds or minutes or days or even weeks using the front part of your head. And this is why implementing these, you know, these things like conviction and meaning and all of these, you know, what we used to call soft skill topics in here, because this part of the brain, quote unquote, gets it a little quicker if you have identified it very well.
Well, and how many projects did you work on in your early days as a project manager or as a delivery specialist that did not have an organizational change management component? You know, until we introduced that, a lot of times we ignored the benefit to the client. And once we introduced, yeah, we did the training, but we trained based on a lot of our concepts. But once you put in the organizational change management component and get the client or the end user working side by side with you, then you really introduce value.
They get it.
Yeah.
And they're actually, when they start seeing that context, and that's what it is. It's that slow process of not just seeing what we have and what they're getting, but how it influences everything around it.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So this quick and efficient processing, we want to remain very analytical and very composed, and we want to use critical thinking. But there are times where we can actually use emotions to great effect on our project. And one of them is when we start talking about value.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things to ask my team or to ask my management a lot of times is to say, can we compare teams who are paycheck interested only versus value interested, i.e. those people who do the job simply to earn their paycheck every 2 weeks versus people who are in it, who want to see that look of delight on their clients' faces. I can tell you from experience which is the more motivated team and which delivers the better product.
Yes, yes. I was working with a team lead here in September and October, and we did not have to have that conversation because he was actually giving the signals and the actual demonstration of where he recognized what we were doing was not just challenging status quo, but it was adding something that was obviously superior and was able to demonstrate something that actually could really, really help people. It was really strange. It was one of those moments where, again, even in the last few months, I was saying, okay, there's more to this value than I understand now.
Yeah. And I was kind of laughing at paycheck interest versus value interest. My paycheck people are important too. But as I used to laugh with my team, the paycheck people typically get put in a back room to do exactly what they do. And we once a day, we shove a pizza under the door for them. That's but they deliver, right? But the value people, I tell you what, there is nothing more rewarding for a project manager than walking into a room where you're seeing let's take an example of user acceptance testing, and you're seeing the client's user acceptance tester struggling with a concept as they're testing, and one of your team walks over and says, "Show me." Just 2 words, "show me." And it's amazing how that immediate collaboration and cohesion forms right there as they work through the problem together, and the lights go on.
Yep.
Well,
yep.
for both people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is an interesting conversation we've had today. It really isn't fitting in with many aspects. The only place that I see value fitting in is a little bit technical, where we can create requirements around our value statements, but primarily leadership and influencing and motivating people. But both you and I agree that this is one of the most important things we can do on a project.
Yeah, and whether it fits in or not, whether we can see it in some of the literature or not, I venture to say that this next year of looking at project management from the human aspects, the people aspects of what we do, I venture to say there's going to be more topics that don't necessarily fit into the PIM box or into the IEEEs or whatever, but are still important to what we do as project managers.
Boy, oh boy, yes, indeed. And again, we're entering an unknown state, just as we did 3 years ago. We don't know what's going to happen really now. At least under lockdown, we knew there was lockdown. Now it's even greater unknown. So I'm really interested in what the standards are looking at in the direction they're going, as well as what people as a whole are, because standards are good, but without people to support and find value in them, what good are they? Yeah. So I'm really interested in our conversations here, and what we find as we explore the business environment, the response of business to environmental changes, and then the people themselves. I think we have a lot to talk about.
Well, and I've joked about this before, but I can hardly wait to hear what we're going to say next week, because, you had laid out, for example, this week we're going to talk about value. Now, thinking back of even our conversation over the last 45, 50 minutes, I did not plan a lot of what it was that came out, because I think as we bounce topics and ideas off each other, different synapses fire, and then we end up having a different conversation than what I was even thinking we might have. So yeah, I can't wait for the next 40 or so episodes in terms of what we have to say.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So in this next week, before we meet again next Friday, where can people reach you if they want to contact you?
Well, the weather's getting nice. They can reach me in my swimming pool. I will have my phone on LinkedIn. No, seriously. LinkedIn is the primary place that I engage with people right now. Almost every day I get someone connecting, and those conversations are really valuable.
Yes, indeed. You can find me also over at LinkedIn. So expect to have me saying hi and asking a few questions of you all, as well as Merv and my other peers on this side of the internet.
All right. So with that, we bid you adieu until next week.
Thanks again, Merv, and thanks everyone.